Blessings, beloveds. Welcome back. Anastasia, Cosmic Astrologer, with you guys. Hope you're all doing well, and thank you so much for tuning in. So, today I'm going to give some reflections, offer some reflections on this Venus Mars conjunction in Leo. And I've put a fair bit of material together, and I'm going to try and just kind of simplify it because it's very complex and there's quite a few different layers. And that's usually what happens when I start to explore something. I tend to find more and more and more the more I look. And that's neither good or bad, but sometimes it just takes a lot of time. Um, so I guess the first thing to talk about is that Venus and Mars, in terms of a conjunction, do come together relatively frequently, and there's not a consistent pattern. They can come together every year or every couple of years, or they can come together 2 or 3 times in that sort of space as well. So it's there's this cosmic sort of dance and romance between them that is sort of fairly unpredictable. There's not a consistent pattern. So that's the first thing. The last few conjunctions we've had between them have been in the sign of Virgo back in 2019, 17, and 15. So I guess some reflection around what did the Mars-Venus conjunction in Virgo highlight for you? And typically when we're talking about Virgo, it is always about critical self-analysis, right? And self-improvement and adjustments and things of that nature. And in what sphere, was that related to? It was related to Mars Venus, which is it's a lot of different things, but some of the things that we can certainly point to. First of all, Mars is your personal desires. It's also the body that you could say is the vehicle for Pluto, trying to actualize the soul's desires. So Mars is acting as Pluto's partner, as it were. When those two are totally aligned, there's an alignment between the higher will and the lower will. And when there's a disconnect, then Mars is just running on a rampage, doing his own thing. And of course, Venus corresponds to many different things, the most important thing being love. The love that we give to ourselves and the love that we give to others. So the love that we receive and the love that we give and share. We also have within all of this, actually, before I go there, so the last few years has been the Venus-Mars conjunction in the sign of Virgo. Now, the last time Venus and Mars were together in Leo was in 2015. And that conjunction was an exact conjunction. The one we are about to step into now is also an exact conjunction, meaning they are technically conjunct, okay, because they can appear to be conjunct, as I'll show you in a moment. And whilst they are conjunct in the same degree, they don't come to the exact conjunction of degree and minute. But they still act as a conjunction, okay? There's no question about that. But I like to kind of look at things in more technical ways as well. So the last Venus-Mars conjunction was in 2015. And so that was an exact conjunction. That was, I think, when Venus was, I think she was retrograde at that time. We'll have a look because I'll bring up the chart in a moment. And so part of what's interesting about that is that at that time, Venus was aspecting the Leo VSP, Venus Star Point. And on the 13th of July, when Venus and Mars come together again in the sign of Leo at 19 degrees, they are actually activating that Venus Star Point again. So that's a very interesting observation that I've sort of been reflecting on the past few days, really, which is why I decided to come on and talk about this, because I did a video on the cycle of Venus through the sign of Leo where I just discuss the different aspects that Venus forms during her ingress into Leo. And so, if you want to hear more about those other aspects, you can always go and listen to that video on my channel, or re-listen to it if you need to. So first of all, before anything else, here's what I want to kind of point to. So this is a transit chart for the 11th of July. And so we're in a new moon phase. Okay, we had a new moon a couple of days ago in the sign of Cancer. So you can see the moon has moved out of Cancer and into Leo. And so the energy is picking up somewhat, but we are still in a new moon phase. Now, this whole lunation cycle, which began as a new moon in Cancer, not an eclipse, just a regular new moon, but it's not just a regular new moon because it was opposite Pluto and square Chiron. Now, this lunation cycle, personally speaking, has proven to be one of the more challenging and more difficult and more confronting cycles for me already. It sort of started while the moon was in balsamic, and it's just sort of created this momentum, and it's just been ongoing to today as well. So I have felt very what's the word, highly triggered by this moon. It's brought up a lot of matters in my personal life with my family, and as a result of that, I've had to reflect on a lot of things and try and draw some objectivity, because when it comes to being triggered emotionally, and when it comes to being triggered by our family members, it's very difficult to be objective, and it's a lot easier to be absorbed in our own pain or emotion or disappointment or despair or whatever it may be that's coming up. Now, this cycle, the reason I'm bringing all this up is because the Venus-Mars conjunction is occurring within this particular new moon cycle. So it's important, I think, to kind of draw the Venus-Mars conjunction in the context of this lunation cycle as well. As I've always said, nothing works in isolation and nothing is separate. So before we get to the Venus-Mars, because I've got quite a few things to say about that, let's just touch on this new moon, which I know I've done a whole video on, right? So, and thank you to those of you who have watched it and who it touched and who it spoke to. And I appreciate all your feedback, and I appreciate you sharing your personal journeys and stories, because part of me sharing what I share on my YouTube channel is to also give people an opportunity to have a chance to use their voice and to share, whatever it is they need to share relative specifically to the content, in that, through that video, for instance. So I just wanted to highlight that it's so literal, this new moon in Cancer there. So to summarize, here's what it's pointing to. It's all coming back to a new cycle beginning that needs to speak to a new self-image of yourself coming through, a new part of yourself being born, reborn. And as I've said previously, death and rebirth occurs pretty much every single day for all of us, in to different lengths, to different extremes, and it's wide across the spectrum. But we are, as souls that are evolving, and particularly people who are actively conscious on their path, the process and journey of death and rebirth is quite intense, and it's happening all the time. And sometimes it's activated and triggered in quite intense processes, and other times it's less intense, right? It just depends, what's going on in your life and what energies are being activated at any moment. But I personally think this particular lunation cycle is actually extremely difficult. And the reason for that is the opposition to Pluto and the square to Chiron, because it is fundamentally talking about giving birth to a new sense of a self-image. What sort of projected image do you have of yourself in relation to your family upbringing, the family dynamics, the relationships, and everything that's kind of enveloped within that. And the square to Chiron is, with in no uncertain terms, going to bring up some kind of trauma, which is actually a wound. Now, I want to highlight this because I did touch on this quite extensively in the New Moon in Cancer video, but I've further reflected on some things, and I think it's important to bring this in. Trauma is often, first of all, astrologically from the evolutionary level, is ascribed to Uranus and Aquarius in the 11th house. But trauma is also associated with Chiron. And the reason for that is because the word trauma, when you look to the root meaning in etymology, the word trauma actually means wound. So Chiron, being the wounded healer, as it were, speaks to those very deep wounds that we have. Now, there's a couple of things I want to say about that. The first thing is that often people have the perception that traumas are defined by very severe circumstances, events, and mostly events that perhaps are more externalized. And yes, that is true. But trauma can occur in very subtle ways through the emotional, psychological, and spiritual dynamics with the people we have relationships with, and the entry to our relationships in the world at any lifetime is through the relationships we have with our family, all of our family. So there can be trauma encountered, at birth. There can be trauma encountered when in your first year of life, in your first 2 years of life, first 3 years of life, and so on. So if trauma has occurred when you are 1 or 2 or 3 or 4, let's say, it is likely that you don't have a clear memory of that from the left linear brain. There would be a memory of that retained within you somewhere, and it lives as a trauma inside. Now, what is that trauma? It's a wound. And what happens to a wound? Think about when, if you've ever had a severe wound through a cut, for example. Now, a wound can either remain open and raw, and so when somebody touches that wound, there's extreme pain that is felt. Or the other way that can go is that the wound gets covered up by hard tissue. And what's hard tissue? Hard tissue is, it's like this thick skin which has no nerve endings on it, right? So it acts as a buffer, as a protective sort of mechanism, and that means that the person can't feel the wound. And so on a psychological level, this is part of what can happen to us when we've had some kind of trauma or wound in our early life. It can actually manifest in either of those pathways. It can remain raw and tender, which creates an incredibly sensitive individual. And so every time somebody goes near that wound, knowingly or unknowingly, that wound is triggered and it brings up severe pain. Now, that person will deal with that wound and that trauma in whichever way they will. And one of the most common pathways is through addiction. Now, again, with addiction is not just defined by being addicted to drugs and alcohol, for instance. We can be addicted to TV, computers, shopping, food, toxic relationships, and so forth. There's many, 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 many levels of addiction. Going back to trauma, I'm speaking about this because this Chiron, I believe, is actually going to activate quite a few wounds for many different people during this lunation cycle, which are their traumas. Trauma, I heard a really great definition by Gabor Mate, who's an expert in trauma and addiction, actually. And what he said was, which I thought that felt really accurate to me, was that trauma, the experience of trauma, is not what happens subsequently after having experienced a trauma is not based on the actual trauma itself in terms of the experience of what that trauma was. I mean, of course, it's part of that, of course. But he said that what trauma really is our inner or internal response to the particular trauma that shows up. So whatever internal response we have to a trauma that happens in our life, that's where the trauma is, and therefore that's where the wound is. And so it's this internalized process that lives inside us that ends up manifesting in pathways that will either bring up matters for a person that have to do with hiding, denying, being out of touch with the trauma, the wound, which ends up blocking a person emotionally to a very large extent, if not completely. And that too could include a pathway of addictions in order to numb the wound and the pain. And it can also be a person who continuously just has that trauma and that wound at quite a surface level, as it were, because it's just an open wound that's raw all the time. So it just depends, how you relate to this when you hear it, right? Based on your own life and circumstances. And Chiron in the birth chart itself, first of all, it's very important wherever it's located. Some houses are certainly more difficult than others, appear to be. Some houses are more difficult to interpret than others, such as the 12th house, right? But in my experience, over so many years of working with birth charts and people's journeys, I haven't ever come across anybody that has said to me that they didn't feel some kind of trauma or wound or a sense of rejection based on wherever Chiron was in their chart. So we are born with an inherent wound, if you like, wherever Chiron is going to be placed, because that's part of our soul's journey and growth. It's something that we need to experience and eventually heal as well. And then in the process of that throughout our life, and I've done a video on this, on Chiron's journey, Chiron's cycle, which has a 51-year cycle. It takes 51 years for Chiron to move from its birth position and to go right around your whole entire chart. That cycle is 51 years or thereabouts. And within that 51-year cycle, Chiron makes all these squares and oppositions and so forth, trines and sextiles as well. And that journey, as it's unfolding, is speaking to opportunities, invitations for us to step into, to understand what that trauma or wound is and how we can actually recover from it and heal from it. And it's not an easy journey. It's not an easy process. And generally speaking, it does take people, most people from what I've seen, it's not until they have their Chiron return that they actually really feel very clear about what this journey has meant, what this cycle has meant, and how it manifested, how they've dealt with it, what sort of relationship dynamics did it speak to, what did it speak to within themselves, and have they come full circle with that whole journey? That's what the Chiron return mirrors back to us. So it's a deeply painful journey at the Chiron return, and the in-between aspects as well throughout that 51-year journey. So lots of people who have Chiron in Aries, every person who's got Chiron in Aries has either had a Chiron return some time ago, is having one, or will be having one, okay, in the next few years. So there's a lot of Aries people with Chiron in Aries, right? Rather, a lot of Chiron in Aries people, I meant to say. On the other hand, you may have personal planets in the sign of Aries, so therefore Chiron is passing over those planets. You may have planets in Libra, so it's forming oppositions to those planets. You may have planets in Cancer, so it's forming a square to those planets, and you may have Chiron in Capricorn, planets in Capricorn, so Chiron is squaring those planets. So the cardinal signs are being activated by Chiron's journey through the sign of Aries. And when you see a lunation cycle, which last month it was there as well, we had the full moon in Capricorn, full moon in, what was it? My brain's just gone a bit fuzzy. Let me just clarify that. I've had a pretty intense emotional day, so my mind's a bit, full moon in Capricorn, that's what I thought. So the full moon in Capricorn, Chiron was in that picture as well, okay? That was a couple of weeks ago. And so now here we start a brand new cycle with the sun and the moon. Chiron is in the picture again. So this is why I decided to speak up on this again at this point with perhaps a bit more detail and just a little bit more, a few more concepts or ideas to think about relative to Chiron being actually connected to traumas and very deep wounds that can be either quite raw or just completely blocked, right? Depending on the person. And the blockage will come through certain ways of life or activities that the person engages in, namely around addictive types of behaviors that acts as really acts as an escape more than anything else, because it's just too painful to go too painful to go there. So in order to avoid it, the person will take on certain behaviors that feels like it's helping them avoid that or not feel that. But we're feeling beings. By our very nature, we are feeling beings, some more than others. Some are more sensitive than others. Some are more intuitive than others. There's all that as well, of course. But fundamentally, we are beings that have a feeling function within us. So there are good feelings, just to put it simply, and there are very awkward and very difficult feelings. And that they are there all the time, and they are being activated all the time in different ways. And some of the more difficult and painful feelings, which are, connected to trauma or rejection or deep, deep, deep wounds and pain, they're not the feelings that we're going to want to open up or unpack or show our vulnerability about, or let anybody see that about us, right? So Chiron being activated through these new moon or full moon cycles is not a coincidence. It's a pretty important message that's coming through, that is extremely painful, extremely difficult to go to, but if you can do it, there's so much you can recover within yourself through the process. So in the context of all of that, we have this conjunction between Mars and Venus, as you can see them here lining up. But before I go there, let me just show you. So here's the conjunction back in 2015 between Mars and Venus in the sign of Leo. There they are there. And Venus was retrograde. So the retrograde cycle, of course, it's the morning star, right? That's when Venus goes retrograde, when she's closest to the Earth, okay? And when she's the furthest from the Earth, she's in her direct movement, okay? A Venus morning star or a Venus evening star are both a conjunction to the Sun. Venus kissing the Sun. Now, this conjunction occurs every 9 months, approximately. And there's a consistent rotation between morning star to evening star, morning star to evening star, and that pattern never changes. Now, in 2015, when they were conjunct, she was retrograde, so she was a morning star, closest to the Earth. So the morning star, because she is closest to the Earth, she corresponds to earthly matters, physical matters, getting things done, actively engaged, energy, power, desire, passion, sex, romance, love, all that sort of stuff would have been all significantly activated during that time back in 2015. So it is worth actually considering reflecting back on, okay, well, so what was happening in my life in 2015? In addition to that, she was activating the Leo VSP, the Leo Venus Star Point that's on the wheel at the moment and has been on the wheel since 1987. That's when the Leo VSP first started, August 23rd, 1987. So for those of you that are born past that date, from that date onwards, you are all born with a Leo Venus Star Point that you can place in your birth chart. That's one of your Venus star points. We all have 5 in total. Now, if you were born before that date, that VSP was in Virgo, okay? Because what happens is the Venus star point moves backwards in the zodiac. So when she completes her journey in one particular sign, which usually takes about 100 years or so, she's going to move backwards into the previous sign. So she was in Virgo, for 100 years or so. And then in 1987, she made her transition into Leo, because Leo is the sign before Virgo. So she moves backwards, okay? Now, the VSP, whether you were born before 87 or after 87, that Leo VSP is still in your chart, okay? It just means that if you were born before 87, you have that as part of your 5 VSP points that you assess relative to just before your birth. And I've discussed this in a workshop that I offered. So if you want to understand more about that and understand how to work that out and how to interpret that and how to understand the difference between natal Venus and your VSP, you can always email me. I've got a 3-hour little lecture or workshop or class rather that I created for that. And of course, there's a video there between Ariel Gutman and myself where we also discuss the Aries VSP that occurred earlier this year in March 2021. So coming back to the present, we can see that there's this Venus-Mars conjunction approaching. Have I actually created a chart for that? Yes, here it is, here. Okay, so 13th of July. Now, I put a post up yesterday on the community section about that I'd be doing this video, and someone asked the question, do you just look at that date as being the important date of this conjunction, or can things still manifest a couple of weeks later? It's a good question because a lot of people probably have it on their minds, so thank you for asking it. And my response to that would be that, first of all, this is a conjunction, an absolute true conjunction, because you can see that both Venus and Mars, let me just grab some, what do I want to use here? Yeah, look, that'll do. Okay. So there's Venus, okay, and there's Mars. And you can see they're both at 19 degrees and they're both at 49 minutes. So that's a true conjunction. Now, what could happen is that because Venus is the faster of the two, they could be dancing around in the same degree, but because of Venus's movement, she could basically just end up bypassing Mars, and they won't actually get to that point where they're exactly conjunct to the minute. This is not the case here because they are conjunct to the degree and to the minute. And that's more important from the point of view of they are reflecting what's called a new phase conjunction. Much like a new moon, it's the same thing. It's the same principle, the same energy. It's a new phase conjunction. So in effect then, there's a couple of layers here. First of all, where is 19 degrees or almost 20 degrees of Leo in your birth chart? It's the first thing you need to look at. The second thing is, what houses do Mars and Venus actually rule in your birth chart? Because those two are likely to be activated and actually give you more clues to the narrative of what's actually showing up for you through this cycle of Mars and Venus. The other thing to note is that the current Venus star point, which is at about 20 degrees of Leo, is right on this. Venus and Mars are passing right over this VSP. So you can draw with your imagination or on a piece of paper if you want to draw out your whole chart, draw in 20 degrees of Leo. That's where the current transiting Venus star point is at. So in this particular chart, this is just a transit chart. It's nobody's chart. In this particular chart, the VSP would be right here. And so imagine that this is somebody's birth chart. And so they've got the Leo VSP in the 5th house, and Mars and Venus is passing over it during this time. It is exact. The conjunction between the two is exact on the 13th of July. But it is a new phase conjunction, and a new phase conjunction means that it's not going to be, this energy is not just active on this day, and it most certainly can show things up in 2 weeks post this day. In fact, beyond that as well, because it's a new phase conjunction. And so what that means is that the journey of this new phase conjunction will come to an end when Venus has moved far away enough from Mars, okay, and then Mars starts sort of traveling behind her, if you like, and they will eventually catch up to each other again, and then that will be another conjunction and possibly another new phase conjunction, depending on whether they are exact or not. Now, let me just bring up another chart to show us what's sort of coming up. So, where are we? Okay. Now, here's the next conjunction. However, there is one. Okay, let me just backtrack. So next year, what happens is that, first of all, we have Venus going retrograde. So she's going to become a morning star, and it's going to be a retrograde cycle. The retrograde cycle is that whole journey of 40 days, 40 nights of her being reborn, as it were. Now, this particular Sun-Venus conjunction, which is the retrograde cycle, takes place on January the 8th of 2022. Okay, so first of all, we have that. And then in March, what happens is Venus and Mars come together in Capricorn, but they are not exactly conjunct to the minute. They form a conjunction at 17 degrees of Capricorn. Okay, so it's still a conjunction, but not a new phase conjunction, as it were. And then as they proceed forward, they come together again in March in the sign of Aquarius. And this is an exact conjunction because they are both at 0 degrees and 1 minute. You can see that there if you just look at the Mars-Venus symbol, look at the 0000 and then 0101, and there's the glyph for Aquarius in between those numbers. That's Mars-Venus conjunction in Aquarius at 0 degrees and 1 minute. That's a new phase conjunction again. So in effect, you know, this Mars-Venus conjunction that's occurring on the 13th of July is really going to take us through, just relative to Mars, Venus, those two planets alone together. There's a journey that's going to be born at this time, and it's going to unfold really until March of 2022. 6th of March 2022, when the next new cycle of those two being conjunct again occurs. But in between all of that, we also have the present moment, which is this Mars-Venus conjunction activating the Venus Star Point at 20 degrees of Leo. So let me just show you that. This is a table that you can download for free from Ariel Gutman's website, which is sophiavenus.com. If you just type that in, you'll come up with her website, and you are able to download this PDF file for free, which is fantastic. And it starts from back in the early 1800s and goes right through till August 8, 2039. And so what this is these columns here, you can see on the left, the first column shows you a date, the second column shows you a time, and the third column shows you the degrees, the sign, the minutes, and the conjunction between Sun and Venus, and whether it is a direct cycle or a retrograde cycle. And if you look at this third column, you can see the letters DR, 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 just, you know, following through. There's no shift in that. They're always following this sequence, because that is the Sun and Venus coming together every 9 months, forming a conjunction. One of those conjunctions is direct, one of them is a retrograde cycle. Now, we just had, what did we have? Sorry, my brain. Where are we? Let me just go to the chart here. So March 26th, 5 degrees of Aries, direct. So that's basically an evening star. Okay, so we just had an evening star cycle of Venus earlier in March this year. And the next one is going to be the next cycle of the Sun and Venus coming together, but in this case a retrograde cycle, is on January 8th, 2022. So we're kind of like, we're approaching, you know, the middle, if you like, of these two Venus star points relative to the month we are in now. So we've still got the vibration somewhat of the 5 degrees of Aries Venus star point showing things, and we're gearing towards now getting ready to step into, I mean, not now, it's quite a few months away, I get that, right? But there's things that can the wheels are kind of turning in that direction now. Okay. And so really by around November, that's when you could probably say that that 18 degrees of Capricorn, Venus star point, is within an orb and a range where it can actually start to truly get activated. And of course, the exact date is January the 8th, 2022. Anyway, I want to talk about that with Ariel Gutman. I'm going to invite her on my YouTube channel again, and if she's so gracious and obliges, we will be all very grateful. So we can talk a lot more extensively about the VSP at 18 degrees of Capricorn, which occurs at the beginning of next year. And let's go back into the present moment. So this Venus-Mars cycle is super important because it's super important, first of all, because it's a conjunction between two planets that it does speak to love, passion, sexuality, creative juice, and love, romance, all those sorts of things. And then it's also speaking to your own heart center. That is being in touch with your heart and opening your heart completely during this time to tune into what's there for you and what you may need to activate, release, become more aware of, work on, step into, that enables you to actually honor your own heart and your own heart space. This is one of the primary messages here, I feel, with Venus and Leo. It's about honoring our heart space and our heart center, but not in a personality self-absorbed level, because Venus in Leo at a mundane personality level can be utterly self-absorbed in itself, in herself, in oneself. The way that can kind of show up is that we're in need of this validation from our partners or our friends or those around us that we consider close to us, because Venus corresponds to friendships, lovers, and people we love. So Venus doesn't define necessarily just one type of relationship. It's always important to keep that in mind. And the other thing to keep in mind here is that her polarity, while she's in Leo, is Aquarius. So I'd like to read something to you, actually, which will really kind of just describe the Venus in Leo from an evolutionary level. And Venus in Leo can be such a beautiful heart-centered energy that has so many beautiful gifts to give, right, relative to her own ability of creative energy and creative desires, and is positively luminous and radiant. And when she loves something or someone, she's incredibly loyal. Where she kind of struggles in the sign of Leo is that she's wanting that reassurance, and she wants to feel special and noticed and acknowledged and validated by those around her before she gives her gifts. And that becomes a problem, because when the person opposite her is not giving her that validation, making her feel special, she can become resentful, she can shut down, or she can become very competitive, because suddenly that person opposite her is now a competition to her own sort of specialness. It's like, well, I'm really special here. Why aren't you noticing me? Why aren't you noticing my abilities and my talent and my gift? And the reason it's not being noticed is because she's not noticing the others, which is Aquarius. And so the balance of a healthy Venus in Leo is to integrate the polarity of Aquarius. And this message can be integrated in this conjunction between Venus and Leo, Venus and Mars at the moment as well. And just before I read something, just another reminder of a Venus-Mars conjunction. It's a very potent energy that can activate passion, sexual desire, romance, love, heart-centered energy, but it can also activate anger as well. Let's not forget that Mars is the planet that corresponds to anger. And part of the problem with the Venus-Mars conjunction can be, until it is integrated in with awareness, right? The problem is that there's an inherent sense of, well, do I do my own thing, Mars, or do I compromise and give in to my partner, Venus? And so the dilemma that exists between Mars and Venus in a conjunction aspect is exactly that. And so this could as well bring up matters that connect to these kind of themes in our life at the moment. Do I honor my own heart at a higher sort of level, right? Or am I just going to be totally selfish here and not consider what my partner needs or what that person needs, because I just need to express what I want, Mars. And if I give in to my partner or compromise, then I've lost my sense of autonomy and personal power. These are the sorts of psychological themes that it can bring up. So whilst it's magical, spectacular, can really activate a number of sort of heartfelt gifts and talents and abilities, and stimulate the creative sort of juices. It can also have a shadow side and a dark side, emanating from the inability to embrace the polarity Aquarius by understanding and appreciating other people's gifts and talents, and realizing that in this cosmic web, in this universe, in this process of evolution, that we are not just one singular person, and the Venus in Leo needs to feel like they are the person in the eyes of, their partner or their friends or things like that. They need to feel special. They become the center of their own universe. And that becomes a blockage to the polarity of Aquarius. So that's one issue, like I said. And the other issue is that the dilemma that might be triggered in someone's journey at the moment relative, do I do my own thing and just be totally independent and free? Or do I compromise and find a middle ground between myself and this person or this particular relationship? And if I do, will I lose my sense of autonomy? That's the fundamental dilemma. Now, just some comments from one of Jeffrey Wolf Green's books about the evolutionary need to proceed forward with a Venus in Leo type of energy. So he talks about the embracement of Aquarius, which I've already touched on. And he talks about having to learn to objectify ourselves versus perpetually living in a subjective reality that does not allow us to be experienced as equal to everybody else. This is the whole Leo Aquarius energy polarity. He says, for these people to fully and completely actualize themselves in the creative ways that they inwardly feel. And just think, everything I'm reading right now, think about this relative to the current transit of Venus in Leo in your own birth chart at the moment. And naturally, if she's passing over any of your Leo planets, if you have Leo planets, or whatever house she's transiting through as well, it can bring to the forefront some of these kinds of themes for you. Um, so, with Venus in Leo, we need to learn to acknowledge the larger group, community, and society that we are all a part of. Aquarius, right? Obviously. Um, and to understand that there's a larger group and there's needs for a larger group as well. It's not just about our own needs. Then he just says that once we learn how to really integrate these polarities with between Leo and Aquarius, what happens is that the creative and unique ways that are integrated and shine within us that's when they can actually come pouring out and be shared, um, with the world. That's when we can truly radiate and be truly luminous and radiate that creative force within us, because Leo is all about self-actualization, actualizing our raw heart center energy, the spark of life within us, to actualize that in a way where we can actually bring forth whatever it is we've got to bring forth from a creative level. And creativity is not defined by just being a dancer, a painter, a musician, or whatever. Creativity is life, period. We are all creative beings, and we are all co-creating in our lives, and we all participate creatively in our lives in different ways. Okay, let's see if there's anything else I needed to read here. That's pretty much it for that. So let me just summarize. So I guess what we can truly consider in our lives at the moment with this Venus-Mars conjunction in Leo is, again, just to repeat, what house is it in? What houses do Mars and Venus rule? Because they will draw part of the pictures, part of the puzzle together for you. And where is it in your life at the moment where you really need to actually honor your heart? Be really present with your heart center, your heart space. And that might mean having to exclude certain things or certain people or certain situations for this time right now, to get to a field within yourself where you can actually really sit with your own heart space and own heart center and really honor your own feelings, as opposed to ignore them, deny them, shut them down, or just be disconnected from them. So it's a journey of honoring our heart so that we can actually open our heart to actually give more love to ourselves and to others. And then there's the level of creative juice that is activated during this time as well, of course, with the archetype of Leo being emphasized. And then we also need to consider the theme, as I mentioned, of is this bringing up in you a conflict of some sort, where there's a split inside you where you might feel like, well, I want to do things this way, and if I do them this way, it means that I maintain my sense of independence and autonomy. But it does mean that I can't compromise and incorporate myself with the other person and what they need. So what do I do if I go to that person and compromise? How do I still maintain a level of autonomy and independence and freedom within myself? How do I not lose that? This is the question that rises between a conjunction of Mars and Venus. And the answer to that question is going to be very unique. So I can't say what the answer is to that because it depends on who you are. It depends on what is the narrative of how this conjunction is manifesting at the moment for you. Where does it speak in your life at the moment? But if you just even if we just step away from all of the various possibilities, it is going to come back to being able to honor your own heart space, being true to your heart, not in ways that brings in, playing games or manipulative behavior or resentment or judgment or any of that stuff that does often get triggered in different relationships for different reasons at different times. This is just about focusing on activating the luminous radiance fire in your heart so that you can actually be more aligned with it and more true to yourself and activate your creative potential as well. And the Venus Star Point is certainly activating all of that while Mars and Venus is passing over her. The Venus Star Point and everything it represents in the archetype of Leo, which is all the things I've mentioned and more, that Venus Star Point in our charts is being highly, highly charged by Mars and Venus at the moment. And again, just to repeat, it's not necessarily all spectacular and glamorous. It does have some shadow components as well. And provided we can be really honest about that within ourselves and what that may be showing to us at this point in life, the more we can actually work with this energy in the most productive manner and the most authentic way as well. So I think I'll leave it there. Hopefully this was food for thought for you and does inspire you to give some thought to everything I've said relative to, what was going on 5 years ago, because there could be a connection to that in some kind of way without question. I also would suggest, if you are working with whole sign houses, that's fine. But if you are working with quadrant houses, it might be useful to actually look at your whole sign houses as well relative to where this transit is occurring. Especially if you're in a whole sign house that is ruled by Mars or Venus at the moment. This Mars Venus conjunction at that Leo Venus star point, if Venus or Mars is the Lord or the lady, I should say, for Venus of the year, then this conjunction's going to be, pretty powerful for what it's going to show up for you, right? It's powerful for all of us, but certainly there are things that can fine tune what might define what appears as a more powerful presence of this energy and why it's so powerfully activated in the life of the person. Okay, I will see you guys very, very soon. Sending you all much love. And the main takeaway from this is honor your heart by being true to your heart, but at the same time being able to understand the other person as well and everything they have to give and offer as well, and what projections or unconscious or shadow things are being activated and triggered at the moment. And if they are with specific people and specific situations, see it as an opportunity for your own healing and recovery and release and clearing. And lastly, allow the Venus Mars in Leo to just inspire you as well, because fire is the quality that injects inspiration into others and ourselves and into life. All fire signs inject that. So this is a really powerful energy that we're we are working with. Okay, see you guys soon. Bye for now.